Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today, I have a lineup of terrifying encounters to share with you. Before we get into those, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links for Patreon and PayPal are in the description below, but my merch is displayed directly under this video. Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks can be found on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first encounter. This happened to me when I lived in southeast Florida. In case you don't know, there are small islands along the coast that connect to the actual mainland by bridges. Many high-end buildings are on these islands, and I used to work security on one of them, usually working the overnight shift because I had no choice about it at the time. I was driving to work one night and just drove over the bridge and crossed onto the island. The power must have been down because the whole island was dark. As I kept going down the road to work, I was impressed by how dark the island really was with no lights anywhere. I didn't see any people moving around as well, and that gave it a very different feeling than what I was used to during the day. All of a sudden, something huge ran in front of my car from the darkness. I slammed on the brakes and just narrowly avoided hitting the thing. I looked to see what it was and saw a huge dog just standing there looking at me. Here's the thing. It wasn't looking at the car, but right at me through the driver's side window. It was taller than my car and very broad with lots of fur. It looked very muscular, which I know sounds strange to say, but that stood out. And so did its large fangs it was showing me. After what felt like a long time, it walked off and disappeared into the darkness. I didn't see it again after that night, and ended up taking a job somewhere else not too long later. But that was probably the scariest thing in my life I had ever seen. Today's second encounter. I spent the day helping a friend move into a new home. He moved a little further away from town and was no small drive back home. So he offered to let me stay the night with his family at their new house, since it was already late. I turned down the offer because I had a family of my own that I wanted to get back to. Part of the trip back through a rural road that was very dark at night, though the sky was clear and the moonlight helped with visibility. As I drove down the road, I saw what appeared to be a huge black dog. Comparing its height to my car, I would say it had to have been about as tall as a cow in all fours. I slowed down to look at it, but then it turned towards me, and I saw its face. Glowing red eyes, bared teeth, and a look of anger, more evil than a demon I could ever imagine. It looked furious, and I thought it was going to charge me. It was terrifying. I almost drove off of the road. When I got the car under control, I looked for it again and saw it running into the nearby woods. Now, the thing about this, when I first saw it, it was clearly on 4 legs, but now it was running on 2. Maybe it only looked that way because of the darkness and how fast it was going and how far it had gotten from the road. But I don't know. I really think it looked like it was running on 2 legs. I had told no one about this. No one who could make sense of it, what I had seen. My wife was understanding, but I don't think she ever really believed me. I think she believed I saw something, but not necessarily what I told her I saw. It's not something you bring up and talk to your kids about either, even though they were all grown up. I wanted to warn my friend and tried asking him if there were any unusual animals or anything he saw while living out there. I only hinted at what I saw without necessarily telling him exactly what I saw, but he said he didn't. I tried talking about it with one other person I thought I could trust, but I could tell that wasn't going anywhere, and then got made fun of by that person, even though he was actually into this kind of thing. I had a kind of job where I wouldn't want anyone to think I was crazy, so I never brought it up again. If the one person I knew who was into this kind of stuff didn't believe me, then I felt no one was ever really going to believe me. I never went back to see or visit that friend. I always came up with a way to get out of it, some excuse, or I was busy, and never went into the country if I knew it would be dark when I'd be driving, either to or from. I don't know what it was, but I never saw it again and never want to see it again. I can still see its face when I close my eyes and think about it. I wish I had just accepted the offer and stayed the night, or that I never went out there in the first place. Above all else, I wish I never looked into its eyes. I can't describe the feeling of dread, of pure evil I felt from them, or the sheer terror I even feel now when I'm writing this. I sometimes think it waited just for me to look into my eyes, that it wanted to make sure I looked into its eyes, and I feel like it's got a hold over me since. I can't really describe it, but it's never really left me. For a long time, I had nightmares about it. I still do sometimes, though not as much as before. I know the nightmares will come back with some intensity now. Though, now that I am concentrating on a memory like this, I'll tell you this. I can't remember faces of people who were important to me in the past, but I can still remember its face and its eyes after all of this time. Today's third encounter. A couple of friends and I had packed up camp earlier in the day, and we were supposed to leave hours ago, but we thought we'd enjoy the setting for a little while longer. We ended up staying longer than planned, but after all, camping had become a rare treat for us, and we enjoyed it. It had gotten darker faster than we planned for, but I had to go off and find a private area and do my business before the drive back. As I headed back to where the others were waiting, it became obvious to me that I was being watched. I had the sense of it for some time, but then there were a sudden shuffling noise and leaves moving around that confirmed my suspicion. More jarring for me was that aside from the noises, it was dead silent. No noise at all from insects or animals is usually a bad sign, meaning something dangerous is in the area. We had camped deep in some old thick woods, which is why I was more on edge whenever I heard the occasional noise behind me as I moved. If I stopped moving, there was no noise at all. It moved when I did, and I could hear the leaves moving then. I'd spin around, but who'd see anything? As soon as I got back into the clearing, I waited, staring hard into the darkness, back in the direction I had come from. The others were just beyond the trees waiting. I could hear him talking, but I knew I was being followed and had to see what it was. I was taking so long that one of my friends came and checked on me. He was about to say something, and then he got quiet and pointed in the direction I had just come from, saying that there was something moving in the trees behind me. So I looked at where he was pointing, and I could see it now. As I stood there, nothing happened at first, but then I saw a pair of eyes close to the ground moving closer to me, stopping just beyond the trees and glaring at me from the darkness. It didn't follow me into the clearing, but just ended up sort of staying at the edge of the tree line. I wouldn't even been able to see where it was except for its red eye shine. The way it was so close to the ground gave me the impression of a person crawling on their belly. There was a tense silence, and I think it could have been a person started shouting at it to challenge it to come out. but it just stayed there, waiting quietly with its eyes locked onto me. I waited, it waited. My other friends heard me shouting and came to investigate. I hadn't looked away from whatever was watching me, which alerted them, likewise, to look in that direction. They saw it immediately. The eyes looked at all of us in turn. One of my friends had a pistol on him and took it out. The eyes immediately looked at the pistol, then back at him, and then back at the pistol, and started to slowly rise up. Slowly, the eyes went from being close to the ground to being about 7 to 8 feet into the air. The whole time, they never moved their gaze away from my friend's pistol. It knew it. It had to. The way it reacted meant that it knew what a pistol was. My friend fired a warning shot into the ground in front of it. Then it again slowly looked at him and then back at the pistol. But it also began to start backing away. It didn't turn away while backing off, though. The eyes just moved back, retreating into the dark, far enough away that I couldn't see them anymore. My friend asked me what it was. Neither of us had any idea. I simply responded, I didn't know, but that we should get out of here. I was thoroughly disturbed by what was going on. I wanted to make sure it was gone, but I also wanted to get out of there. That's when we heard noises moving towards the side and understood that it was probably trying to circle around us to get us from behind. That was too much. We quickly backed up, watching the area where we last heard the noises until we made it back to where the vehicles were parked. We got in as fast as we could to drive home. One of my friends was riding with me, but we didn't really say much. As I drove away, I began to wonder if I overreacted or imagined the danger where there wasn't any. Maybe it was just someone playing a prank on us, but something caught my eye in the rearview mirror, and I looked at it to see a pair of red eyes very high off the ground watching us as we got away. Today's fourth encounter. I grew up in rural Oklahoma and saw many strange things out there. Where I lived, some of them roads were just dirt roads. The traffic was so light and the number of people living there so small, there wasn't anybody who saw fit to actually pave them and make them real roads out of them. It didn't really bother me too much. I had a truck. What I'm getting at is the roads were not taken by more than except maybe a handful of folk. And if something were to happen out there on them, there wouldn't be anyone to know. That's the backbone of my story, because I just so happened to come upon one such happening one time out there early in the morning hours. I was on my way out to the town, but was fixing to turn back because I forgot my billfold somehow, when I just so happened upon a pack of 3 huge canines sitting right up there in the middle of the road. The dogs were just sitting out there as if they owned the place, as if it was the most natural thing for them to be doing up at that time. Then out comes one from the nearby crops, bigger, heavier, and meaner looking than all the rest of them. As soon as I saw that one, I was thinking to myself, yup, that's the alpha, because the others hopped right up quick. The alpha then turned and he gave me this really mean, long look that scared me cold. Then he went and growled really loud at the others. I wasn't all too close to him, but I could hear all the growling really clear, like he was right there aside of my truck, sitting right next to me the entire time. Then what happened, if I hadn't seen it for myself, I would not and could not believe it. I don't expect that anyone will believe me either, but I'll tell it all the same. This is the exact way everything happened. All 4 of them stood up slowly and walked off, just like you and me do. They were on 2 legs. They went into those crops there and didn't come back out again. I waited a decent while before starting up on my way again. When I drove up by to where they went off to, I couldn't see any sign of them at all. I never did see them again either. I had to make use of the road plenty of times after that, but I sure made sure it wasn't early in the morning hours again. Today's final encounter. Many years ago, my much older cousin wanted to take me to Chicago to see the 4th of July fireworks. He was an orphan taken in by his aunt and uncle, my parents, and had lived with us for years. Since he was part of the family for so long, I had basically grown up with him. I thought of him as being more of an older brother. I had turned 8 and he thought I was old enough for a long drive to the city. We had seen the fireworks on TV prior years, but now he wanted to take me to see them in person. And he had also been looking forward to enjoying the atmosphere and celebrations in the city. Along the way, I had to use the restroom, but we hadn't come across any stations or stops in a long time, and I really had to go, so we just pulled over while in a rural area. We'd been driving for hours, and it was already dark, and there was almost no traffic on the road, but I went over to the trees anyway for privacy. It was a clear night, and the woods were filled with sounds of insect life. When I was ready to go, I realized that it was dead quiet, and that some subtle shift in the atmosphere occurred while I was too busy to notice. I felt like I was being watched, looking into the trees up ahead. I saw many, many pairs of eyes in the woods, beyond where I was. There were so many, it was like every tree bush and branch had a pair of eyes. I watched them for a while in surprise, long enough to have needed to blink a few times by then. But not once did any of those eyes blink. They didn't move either. Maybe it was just me, but they looked very angry and evil. I had a sense of being threatened. To test whether or not they were just reflections, I walked over to my right side and then to my left, further than where I was originally standing. I watched them the whole time. The fact that they never once took their eyes off of me, but instead followed my movements back and forth the whole time, is what convinced me that they were not reflections. I called my cousin over to see. He had been in a good mood the whole trip, eagerly looking forward to reaching the city, but when he saw the eyes, he went quiet. His back had stiffened. He stood up straight and stared silently at them for a moment. Then he abruptly told me to get back into the car quickly, that we had to leave immediately. I could tell that his mood had obviously changed after seeing the eyes. But when I asked him what they were, he would just say that it was regular forest animals, and that was nothing unusual. Despite that, he also unexpectedly decided that we traveled far enough for that day, and that he was taking me back home. He no longer had any interest in going to the city, and was more concentrated about getting out of there as fast as possible. We had driven all the way, but now we were going straight back home without any explanation. He was quiet and serious the whole way back, no longer keeping the radio on or making any jokes, just not talking at all. When I asked him about that, he said he was tired and that's why he had to go back. When I asked him what the eyes were, he would insist that they were just regular animals and that there was nothing to discuss. He never talked about that night again, nor did we go for a drive to the city after that. He was very weary about going into any wooded areas in the dark, but he would never refer directly back to that night as the reason. I learned to stop bringing it up. Within a year, he moved out to get married and went to live in another state. Maybe there's no connection, but the entire trajectory of his life seemed to change after that night. He had a promising future, but he lost interest in school. He went from being happy and optimistic to emotionally withdrawn from any family. He began smoking, drinking, and staying out at night. Even the girl he married is someone he never talked about or introduced any of us to ahead of time. We never knew she existed until unexpectedly came home with her one day, saying that they had just gotten married the same day and he immediately moved out. He broke ties with the family. He's basically been estranged ever since he suddenly went off on his own. The whole situation was very sad for me and was especially painful for my parents. In the years since then, we never had a chance to talk about that night again. However, over the years, I almost never thought about those eyes in the woods. When I do remember them, even now, I wonder what they really were and what may have happened with my cousin. All right, guys, that last encounter reminded me of my encounter with my friends. Um, just seeing a bunch of eyes out in the woods, completely terrifying. I actually got cold chills while I was narrating it. Um, the other encounter that got me was when the guy was using the bathroom outside and was walking back and could hear something, and whatever the creature was focused on the pistol and was very low to the ground and then stood up and was 7 to 8 feet tall, and all they could see was these eyes glowing red staring at them and the pistol. I don't know how I would have handled that situation. I may have just shot at it, but that's probably a dumb idea too. Uh, yeah, I mean, sometimes if you don't see what's out there and you only see the eyes, that's more terrifying, I think. Like even sounds, when you hear the howling or something creeping up in the woods on you. I'd rather see what's going to get me than just imagine what's going to get me. You know what I mean? Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed today's upload. I want to thank you for all of your support. It truly, truly means the world to me. And with that, I'm going to bid you farewell. May the Great Spirit watch over all of us and guide us through our path of life.